thank you, Tracy, for inviting us, allowing us to share our talk with everyone today.
We can.
Women's Arts Association, really proud to sort of be in this space. We're surrounded by all of the arts that we've been able to bring together for the International Women's Day celebrations. And we've also got our Setch, our annual Setch artist talk here with Diane Davies, who's joining us from the Friends of the National Museum of Wales, and you'll be taking us into the lives and works of two women artists that should be more well known to me, at least, others as well. I was also kind of found out what our talk was about. I've got to be honest, I didn't actually know the names, I didn't know the artists, so which kind of says a lot, which says a lot about me, and says probably a lot about the art world in general, and women's names with artists. Women's names are not well known enough. So this will be a real education for me, and maybe some others, maybe not so much. So I'm going to really looking forward to today's talk. So thank you, Diane, for being willing to do it.
Thank you first of all for I'm supposed to talk very closely to the mic, but I think it's going to be very difficult, so I do manage to move around. But thanks for inviting me, and it's a pleasure really to be able to talk about two artists who I think should be far better known. Though I'm a bit of trepidation about talking about artists to other artists, but we'll see how it goes. In choosing the topic, I chose these two artists, and my first thought was that I was sort of joking them together, but when I started putting things together, I began to see that they do make interesting contrasts. So one was a scholar, one was a sculptor, and the other was a painter. So one was born in Cardiff, but did all her work in London, and the other one was born in Bristol, but came to live in Cardiff, and then just down the road in Porthcurry. And she did all her real work in Cardiff and in Porthcurry. So one was spent her entire life really absorbed in painting, and the other one turned from art to political action and this fight for social justice. So up on the screen, I've sort of got two little images for each of the two artists, and sort of subheadings for one. So Edith Downey is the artist and art activist, and so she's represented there by two signatures. One is a signature on a bronze statue, and the other is an embroidered signature from her time in prison, which we'll come to talk. And then Leslie Charlton is represented by a detail from one of her early works, which shows a woman gazing longingly at a paint box while a man rummages through the contents as if they belong to him by some sort of right. So I will start with Elizabeth, with Edith Downing. When I first came across her by seeing a full life-size bronze bust of a woman in the National Museum of Cardiff. If you could move on to the next. I'm on it, you're yeah. And I'm excited to say at the moment it's the only work that is on view at National Museum of Cardiff. So the label proclaimed it to be music, and it's and it was produced in plaster. During her lifetime, really, all her works were in plaster, but the works that I'll be showing you on the slides are mainly in bronze and as well in stone. So what made me really want to get to know her better was the label. which went on to say that she'd been born in Cardiff and was a suffragette who'd spent some time in prison and on hunger strike in prison. So what she's looking at, she's studying the old 100th in a small music book. If we can move on to the next. So that's a detail of the sculpture. And what for me was striking was a sort of deep sense of contemplation and absorption in the music that she manages to evoke in the sculpture. But it was also this sort of contrast between a classic and almost academic style compared to her radical political activity as a suffragette. So it was that that spurred me on to try to find out more about her. So Edith Downing was born in Cardiff in 1857, and she, by the 1881 census, she was still, when she was 24, she was still living in Roath with her parents and with two of her siblings. But according to a letter she wrote to the museum in 1929, her interest in art and sculpture was encouraged when she was a schoolgirl at Cheltenham College. So she clearly came from a well-off background, and her father was in fact a ship's broker. So she was able to study it and study art. So sometime in the 1880s she moved to London with one of her sisters, because in the 1891 census she was living in Chelsea and was a student at what was then known as the Female School of Art at South Kensington. It was part of the National Arts Training School, which became the Royal College of Art in 1896. So, as a female artist, she had to study in a separate building, away from the men, and any models in the life classes had to be decorously draped on the grounds of propriety. Then, from 1892, for a year, she studied at the Slade School of Fine Art. By 1892, she also began to exhibit regularly at the Royal Academy and with the Society of Lady Artists, which became the Society of Women Artists in 1899. Then, by 1901, she moved to Tite Street in Chelsea, where she was to remain for quite a number of years, up to at least 1912. In the 1901 census, she described herself as a sculptor and was living by her own means and working from home. So that was where she had her studio, in Tite Street in Chelsea. Then by 1906, she was living with Ellen Sparks, who became her partner for the rest of her life. So that's a sort of overview of what I know of her career. So as I said, go back one. So this is the one image I have of her. This is her working on a plaster bust, which, as I said, was the main way that she exhibited her works during her lifetime. There are just two works that I know of that are not held by the National Anglo Company, National Museum of Wales. One is she completed a marble altarpiece with 32 alabaster figures, so a really big work for St Peter's Church, Wombridge in Herefordshire. So I've not been able to see any image of it, or got to just visit the church. Then there is an early work from 1899, which if we... Tracy, sorry, move on now. which is called Pompilia. It's described as being a stone on the Art UK website. That's the only source I have for the image. To me, it doesn't look like stone, but that's what Art UK says it is.
That's big, isn't it? It's like with the 10 something, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Is this the one in the church?
No, this is basically it was donated after her death by one of her sisters to the College Hall at the University of London, which is the first hall of residence for women after her death, in memory of her work for women. So that the work can be seen in the University of London College Hall. So Pompilia was a young Roman wife and mother who was accused of adultery with a priest and murdered by her husband in 1698.
Makes things complicated.
The story was popularised by Robert Browning in a poem, The Ring in the Book. So, press on the next slide. So this is a detail of the work, and you can see these male figures sort of in the background, leering out at the viewer. And she's holding the baby protectively in front of her.
Beautiful.
So, as I said, all our other works that I'll be showing now are bronze casts of works that she would have exhibited in plaster. And she started, the works that we have are from the early 1900s. And I'll come back to how the museum acquired all these bronze bronze castings of her work later on. So the first one I want to show you is the next slide. This is Motherhood. And if you go on to the next slide, there's a reverse view of as well. So that's Motherhood by Edith Dowden.
It's down. That's behind the gold, and it's making it.
So she did have a feel for the sort of idea of these flowing drape, it was like Fortuny-like dresses.
Where did you say this from? Sorry, guys.
Sorry, anybody wants to make comments on the sculptures, please do so.
So where is that?
The works I'm showing now are in the store in National Museum Cardiff.
Not very county.
They're not on view. The only one on view at the moment is Music, which was the first one I showed you. That's still open. It's in Gallery 16, along with the other sculpture. So it's in the Rodin section.
Yeah.
But it's
So that's where they're being on view, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, it is.
It's a shame it's not. Do you know why it's not, or is it just?
I don't know. When I first came across her, there were 3 works that were on display. I think partly at the moment it's because so many rooms are still not accessible because of roof problems.
They have got a rack there as well. I'd like to sit down as well.
No, I think that fortunately the building was built before rack was invented. Unfortunately, it was built long enough ago that water's now started to permeate the stone, and so leaking problems, they say, is something that they're having great difficulty solving. Anyway, back to Edith Dowden.
Yes.
So the next one, next slide, this is Socks, which was made in plaster in 1906. And the next slide, we'll move on one, and we'll see that's back view of that. And then the next one is Boy with a Cherry, or with Cherry. And the next click on, and that's the reverse, which gives you a better view of the cherry. So that was done in 1907.
So can I ask,
Yes.
is the date 1930 when they were cast as bronze?
That's the cast.
Yeah.
Right. These were all bronze, made in bronze in 1930. And,
So
that,
they've been
and,
there
I will,
much
and I will tell you why and how that came about later on. So good patience, and we'll get there. Then the next slide. This is avarice. Now avarice was displayed as one of a really striking sculpture in the National Museum of Cardiff on the stairs as you went up the stairs. But unfortunately it's not there at the moment. And the next slide. So it's a really dynamic sculpture. So our left hand holds the money bags, which you can just about see on the left hand side image. And then this wonderfully dynamic right arm is stretched out, trying to grasp more. So I think it's an amazing sculpture.
With all the muscles.
Yes, and the muscles, all the tentacles, it's fantastic. And at the time, when it was made in plaster in 1907, it was met with admiration. And the plaster version was shown in the Paris Salon in 1908.
Right.
With the inevitable surprise that it was made by a female artist. It was originally called Spirit of the Trusts, and was in fact a commentary on an American banker's planet of 1907, which was comparable to the financial crash of 2007-2008, which occurred across the world with the collapse of the Lehman Brothers. But it's clearly an indication of her wish to engage with contemporary politics. So, I'll show you one more of her sculptures, which was made in 1909, and that's lyric music. And the next slide shows the reverse. So, round about this time, she began to become much more involved with the suffrage campaign. So I want to just sort of talk or say briefly about the suffrage campaign. So in 1903, she joined the National Union of Women Suffrage Societies, which was led by Millicent Fawcett. That was the long-standing campaigning group that worked for women's suffrage, for the vote to be granted to women on the same basis as it was given to men. And it did that by organising petitions, writing to letters to politicians and to newspapers. But like many others, she became disenchanted with this sort of constitutional approach, because the government, as you did know, they have no intention of giving votes to women in any sort of form. So, in 1903, Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughters founded the Women's Social and Political Union, the WSPU, which had a restricted mandate. It only wanted votes for women based on property. But, of course, its main difference was its tactics, which were confrontational, trying to attacking whichever party was in power, and going to all sorts of political non-violent actions to get their way. And they were the suffragettes, and they were named to distinguish. It was a pejorative, as I've got to pronounce it correctly, pejorative term originally for them, which they took on board, and was a mark of distinction, really. So they promised deeds, not words, and they did fulfil that promise. So she followed that path of disenchantment, and in 1908 she joined the WSPU, Chelsea branch, together with her sister. And in an article for the newsletter, she referred to the futility of quiet work. So she began to see that creating sculptures was not, there was more to things than creating works of art. So then, from then on, really, her most important artistic work was as a designer of the processions that the WPSU organised, which was a way of publicising their message. So in June of 1910, can we go to the... you've moved on?
Sorry, I've done that one, but I can go back.
That's fine. So this was the called the Prison to Citizenship March, and together with somebody called Marion Wallace Dunlop, she designed a float, the Prisoner's Tableau, and the float celebrated hunger strikers who had endured forced feeding and faced death without flinching. So it was drawn by 2 white horses and featured a suffragette in prisoner's garb, surrounded by young women in white dresses and with green and purple caps who looked on with admiration. So that was her first work as a designer of these processions and pageants that the WPSU was organising at the time to put forward, to publicise their message. So, in that summer then, they called off their militant activities because there was a new bill, a new suffrage bill had been introduced in Parliament, but the House of Commons refused to pass that, and so the WPSU entered the truce, and its members demonstrated in Parliament Square, and many were arrested, including Edith Downes. She was released without charge, but 5 days later she was arrested for throwing a stone through a window of Somerset House, and this time was sentenced to 7 days in prison. But then in 1911 saw the biggest and most spectacular of the WPSU processions. This was the Women's Coronation Procession, held a week before the coronation of George V, and was intended to enlist the support of the King in getting what's called a conciliation bill through Parliament. The bill would have extended the franchise to wealthier property-owning women. And again, she was involved with Marion Wallace Dunlop in designing the key elements of this procession. So she designed a float, which you can see there, the Pageant of Empire, which was on top of the float were figures representing East and West, and the lower 2 women depicting various colonies and dominions. The procession was around 40,000 women. It was led by 2 suffragettes on horseback. Now that's a detail of, sorry, we've moved on. You anticipated me yet. Exactly, as I would like. So that's a detail of the float. But then there were 2. So the procession was led then by 2 suffragettes on horseback with armour, personifying Joan of Arc, which she also designed. And in addition, there was a band playing Ethel Smythe's newly completed work, the March of the Women, which had become the suffragettes' anthem. With the failure of the conciliation bill in Parliament, the window smashing campaign intensified, and in March 1912, Edith Downes marched through the West End was amongst those who marched through the West End smashing windows with stones and hammers. She was arrested, rather appropriately, for breaking the windows of a fine art dealer in Regent Street.
Perfect.
In a speech to the jury, she spoke of police brutality and the regret that law-abiding women should be compelled to take such actions. Whilst in Holloway prison, she took part in a mass hunger strike and was force-fed before being released, before completion of her sentence. And it's during this stay in Holloway Prison that she contributed to the suffragette handkerchief. Can we move on to the next slide? This was a handkerchief embroidered with the signatures of over 60 women in prison for their involvement in these demonstrations. In a way, it was a sort of symbolic use of a traditional women's craft to celebrate those who fought for the right to vote. And her signature is on the handkerchief. It's there. And it's really striking then that there are no records then, after 1912, of her as a productive artist or as an activist. One can only speculate really as to why. It may have been due to the increasing militancy of the WSBU, which went on to do greater acts of violence and became increasingly autocratic under Christabel Pankhurst's leadership. But the absence of other artistic activity might be because her health was really damaged by the forced feeding that she endured in Holloway Prison. So I have no idea.
Where's the handkerchief kept?
That I don't know. I should have noted that.
That's the bullet.
It does say at the bottom of the handkerchief, votes for women, Holloway Prison, March 1912. So
yes, but it would
possibly it's archived somewhere near there.
I think it's archived somewhere in London.
Yeah.
From my source, I don't think the source sort of told me where it was, because I think I just spotted that and wrote it down. But that's a really good question, actually. So the story of her sculptures had been taken up in December 1928, when she was living near Guildford. She wrote to the National Museum, the Gaither Cymru, offering 9 of her sculptures to the museum and offering to have them cast in bronze. So the 9 bronze sculptures that I've illustrated in, well, I haven't illustrated all of them yet. They must have represented something significant to her, for her to choose those 9 out of her work as being ones that she wanted to have memorialised in bronze. So she offered this to the museum. The museum, of course, got to get worried and consulted Sir Gosling and John as to whether they were suitable for display in the museum, and he clearly approved. And only after that did he welcome her generosity. So they were cast by A.B. Burton Foundry in Thames Ditton, which I gather was the foundry for casting bronze at that time. So, and when they were received by the museum, the museum reported it was delighted to have them, and many of them then had displayed them in the main entrance of that.
So who paid for that?
She did.
Wow.
So,
How many dishes that have you shown me?
of course, she came from a well-off family, and
Yeah.
so
Both.
So, I'll now show you the other works that are held by the Gaither Cymru. So the next slide shows the Mask Seller,
Yeah.
which is a female nude with an outstretched left arm offering a grotesque mask and carrying further masks in the basket. And it's I find it a very strange contrast. You have this new figure offering masks for concealment. I mean, I'm sure it's clearly deliberate.
Do you know the original date of that?
No. So there's no dates. For the plasterworks, only the fact that they were cast in 1930 and onwards. So if we move on to the next slide, which is of St Margaret.
Great.
Sorry. Just fell asleep then.
So St Margaret is the patron saint of pregnant women and the falsely accused.
So that was, I think we
So that's clearly why she chose, Jan chose it. St Margaret was tortured and beheaded for refusing to renounce Christianity. And just next slide, just a detail of the markers of the name at the bottom, which is very, very Art Nouveau. I see. So she was really well up in what was happening in the artistic circles of the time.
She must have had excellent teachers out of her skills. She's very skillful.
Oh yes.
I don't know detail.
I don't know. I can't give you any information as to what made her choose sculpture, which is not. There are very few women artists who are sculptors in this period of history.
But the writing on this piece shows that it probably was made in the 1920s because of
No. It was made in the 19. I think it was made between 1897 and 1909.
Okay.
Which is when she was political.
The Art Nouveau.
No, Art Nouveau was.
It was that. Sorry, I was thinking.
Art Deco, I think it was.
Yeah.
And so I'll move on to the final slide, which is called Alice. And again, I have no idea why. Alice must have been somebody important to her. It was really just a relief of somebody that she came to know.
What's the
So her legacy is this set of nine bronzes and one stone relief in London, but the 9 bronzes that are held by Agatha Cumberly at Masterwood in Cardiff.
one on display?
So did she leave a lot to choose from when she chose the 9? Did she leave a lot in London?
Well, I don't know, but clearly, as I said, clearly these 9 must have been really significant to her. It's been the works that she wanted to be cast in bronze. So her legacy is these bronze sculptures and the success of the campaign for giving women the vote. I mean, it took a World War to shift political opinion until in 1918 with the Representation of the People Act, where women over 30 were enfranchised, and then in 1928 full enfranchisement with the same version of rights as men. And Edith Down did live to see all that happen. She died in 1931.
So every sculpture and plaster sculptures, do they last or do they deteriorate?
I don't know. I have no idea what happened to them.
They must be quite fragile.
Yes, but they would have. Well, I don't know that because they were exhibited. I mean, one of them would travel to Paris to be exhibited in Paris somewhere in 1908.
But over time, I mean, maybe
It deteriorates later on.
Well, unless they're kept properly kept, yes. But what happened to them, I don't know. What happened to all her work, apart from these 9 bronzes and that David Cumberly has. I'm afraid now, I don't know.
so we're lucky to have them.
We were lucky to have them. Yes.
It really was
Just if interested, the handkerchief that we saw earlier is displayed at the Priest House in West Hoathly in West Sussex in England.
Was there a priest house where she was living?
Yeah.
Well,
That's where it says it's displayed.
yes, because it was signed by so many. I mean, who knows who took possession of it after they were released from Holloway. But
68, I think 68.
What medals thing?
it's over 60.
Yeah.
So move back to the next slide, and so I now must talk about. Yes.
You've got Elizabeth Downing and Edith Downing.
Her name was Edith Elizabeth Downing.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk now about Felicity Charlton. As with Edith Downing, I'm going to start with the work that made me intrigued about her. And this was, I came across one of her paintings on a visit to the Tim Vivian Gallery in Swansea. So if we go to the next slide. This painting is called if I can pronounce it properly, Cineraria.
It's just special.
It sort of, there has this surrealistic echoes. Reminds me of the Shuriko, that's the way to pronounce it. These empty streets that he was very fond of painting. These streets do seem to be more realistic. But in the foreground you have this sort of still life with a stone balustrade. But you have with a topple plant pot, and that's where the plant is Cineraria, which is native to those botanists amongst you, very native to the Canary Islands, and has bright green leaves and sort of daisy-like crimson colour flowers. And they're on a red and black cloth. And then the buildings of the street run away to the left into the distance. Now, for some reason, I keep thinking it's sort of running. It looks a bit like Barry. I don't know if those who are very familiar with Barry have the same impression. But and so I wondered whether anybody who's from the locality recognises any of the buildings. But the scene is empty of people, and it's as if they've disappeared suddenly for some unknown reason.
Sorry. Listen.
So the plant pot and the overturned and the open teapot are sort of the only evidence of in a former presence. And it's very sort of disturbing picture in that sense. So Felicity Charlton was born in Clifton in Bristol in 1913. Both her parents were artistic. Her father was an architect and her mother studied art in Brussels.
Wow.
And she was one of 4 siblings, and they were all constantly drawing when they were young. She was encouraged to continue with art, and at the age of 14 she attended Bristol School of Art for 1 afternoon a week to learn about watercolour blending. Then she took examinations in drawing and painting, and from 1932 to 1937 she studied painting and sculpture at the West of England College of Art in Bristol. Now, it was there that she met her husband, and that was Evan Charlton, who was an artist with a strongly, who painted strongly in a surrealistic manner. And I think during her lifetime, he was certainly better known than she was as an artist. He had arrived in Bristol in 1935 to teach painting. They married in 1936, and in 1938 they moved to Wales when he became head of Cardiff Art School. So they found accommodation in Sandown, and they lived there until 1957 when they moved then to Porthcurry. In a catalogue for her an exhibition that she held with Evan in 1981. She summed up her approach to painting as being, in my pictures, I've always tried to express the interest I feel about where I live. Try to compose the figures to form interesting patterns without being too obvious about what they are about. So bear that in mind when you see these paintings. And they can be seen from early paintings from the 1940s. The next two I'm going to show you are in the Newport Museum and Art Gallery.
Wow.
So this is the painting that I first mentioned, Auction. So they are, the people are compressed into the space, and she creates these sort of sculptural forms. And they are in very muted, both this and the next one I'll show you, they're in very muted colours, which is probably indicative of sort of wartime austerity. This is 1940, or this is 1940. Yes, this one is 1940. So it shows a large crowd attending an outdoor auction somewhere on the coast. You can see in the background. I mean, the only one who isn't muted is the woman on the left, who wears a black fur-lined coat and hat, and is, as I said, looking down longingly at these artistic materials, which the man is casually rummaging through, as if they are already his by right. So the next one, again from 1942, it's Flag Day. So if we want to Flag Day, which those of you who know old Cardiff will recognise David Morgan's in the background. They are depict flag sellers outside the David Morgan department store. And you'll notice that all of the shoppers are women. And again, painted in muted colours. The only male figures are the dummies in the windows. So she had a sense of humour. And then the muted colours allow you get the blood redness of the paper flags and flag sellers selling. So there's that contrast. So at this time she was also painting in watercolour, and there is a fine example of her work a watercolour that she painted in around this time, which is in the print and drawings collection of Gator Properties. You need to ask to see it, and that's the garden. If you go on to the next slide.
By computer sensitive.
There it is. So it's an enclosed garden with fruit trees and daffodils and garden seats, and no people at all.
Right.
Looking at the in detail, the tree trunks and paths are formed by washes in colour, but the twigs and the daffodils are done with painted brush strokes of yellow flecks, with yellow flecks to create the daffodil flowers. And it may well be the garden she was familiar with, as during the war she worked as a market gardener as her contribution to the war effort. She described these early works as conventional, and her style, and said that her style changed after the war, when she admits she was influenced by the surrealistic paintings of her husband, Edward Jordan. But after the war, she did find herself with much more time to paint, because her husband became Her Majesty's Inspector of Art for Wales, and later for England. So he was away for a long period of time. And so she began to paint and exhibit regularly with the South Wales Art Society and the Royal West of England Academy. And she also exhibited 3 times at the Royal National Estate. So a fascinating picture, I think, from the 1950s is the next one, which is Garden and Greenhouse. This is held by the Newport Museum and Art Gallery. So it shows an enclosed garden in late autumn, but it's divided into two parts, with the left-hand side showing the walled garden, with vegetable patch and a leafless fruit tree, and the right-hand side shows the greenhouse with pot plants and hanging baskets. So there's a contrast between winter browns and the warmth of the flowers and greenery on the right. And it's all sorts of watercolour techniques have been used, with the tromboil effect of the handle of the fork, the garden fork, the spade, and the wicker hanging basket.
Okay.
In the centre are two seated figures, and if you move on to the next slide, you can see those in detail. So that's a detailed picture, and that shows the two figures. So there's a man in working clothes and boots who's seated on a outside on the bench, and a woman in a dress and court shoes who's on the right. So that they're divided by this white vertical frame of the greenhouse. The woman is behind glass, and again it may well be a sort of social commentary on social expectations.
Yeah. She did the thing.
But the big change event in her life came in 1957, when she and her husband were able to purchase a large semi-detached house in Porthcurry, where she was meant to live for the next 50 years. They converted the largest room in the house into a studio, with its windows looking onto a terrace, with views down to the woodland and the hoosh sweep of parkland that is Porthcurry Park, and Cold Nap. So she shared this studio with Evan, and they worked at opposite ends. In an interview with the Western Mail in 1981, she says of the house, "Directly I saw it, I knew it was the only place I wanted to live." The move marked a change to painting outdoors, using the local landscape as a backdrop, and especially when she was given permission to paint in the grounds of Porthcurry House. Presumably they were still owned by, privately owned. So, now to the next, you anticipated me again. This is an example of the garden at Porthcurry inspired it. It's Porthcurry Bay and Roses. And this is held by the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth. So you've got a close-up of pink and red roses in the garden, and a dramatic view down to the Bristol Channel and the cliffs of the Heritage Coast.
It's a beautiful piece of art, I guess.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
This is from 1964. In complete contrast is the next one, which is a realistic picture from 1969, which shows Castleton Baptist Chapel. It was a commission from the Welsh Arts Council, which wanted paintings recording the diversity of Welsh chapels throughout Wales. So this is just one of a series of paintings that they commissioned. So it's a view of the chapel built in. The chapel was built in 1859 in stone with decorated brickwork, and she sort of shows almost photographically the imposing facade and the elaborate brickwork. Then in the 1970s, work began to change again, and she began to create pictures with an elusive dreamlike quality. And this is an example that's held by Agatha Cymru. And so she shows figures set amongst trees or terraces or vistas of her own and neighbouring gardens, which she rearranges for her own purpose. They're a combination of the real and imagined. The landscape is a setting for an imagined narrative. And she says about them, "I'll use actual things, scenes from the garden here and there, and the figures will be imaginary. I might use an arm and a head from a magazine. They are an imaginative parallel of the real world." So the figures invite one to get them into a story. But she does give teasing narrative titles, and she says she found it fascinating when people told her what was happening in the paintings.
She was being arch then, wasn't she?
I think, yes, probably
Yeah,
was.
yes, because she's always working towards a sense of allegory, that, you know, you're in a mystic landscape, the dream landscape, or it's paradise on earth, isn't it?
It does feel like that. It does feel sort of Edenish, yes.
Yes, it also has this sort of otherworldliness of the first image you showed us, you know, like the Shiroko street, as it were.
Yeah.
There's something not spooky about it, but something that's...
I think it is spooky. I think the fact that the flower pot's overturned and the teapot is up and everything's just been left. And the people who were clearly having tea there have gone away for some strange reason.
But those two people talking to each other, they could be on a bench in heaven. You know what? You know, there's always this sense of an otherness in her work. And in fact, not unlike Watteau.
Yes,
I got some big.
yes, there's that sort of feeling. Though, I think if I'm right, she was a
Brilliant.
youngster, as a young painter, she was influenced by Bonnard.
Fine.
But I couldn't see that. I can see when you say Watteau.
Just so we call it.
So there's three women and two men in an island in a shrubbery. The two central women are walking, but each is isolated and seems unaware of the others present. And they have seem to have little interaction between them. If you go to the next slide, this is a detail of the man and the woman in the painting, and the figures seem to merge with or subsumed by the virgin nature that they encroached into. It's almost as if they're becoming one with the natural world. And
She was very influenced by myth as well. So, you know, in Daphne, when she regards a tree, escape seals. And then this one, he's almost giant.
yes, I mean it's difficult to see there, but there's the greens and the browns are painted with flecks of colour to form the leaves and the shade created by the sunshine. And they seem to just cover the figures as they are becoming part of the landscape. So a very similar picture is Searching for Treasure, which is the next slide.
Oh, yeah, that's one.
Which shows two women picking their way through a thicket, with one of them holding an open box. Behind them there are two other figures, one who's bending down and placing an object in a bucket. Again, the trees and the shrubbery are painted with flecks, but there's scoring of the paint to create highlights, to accentuate the light catching the branches. So, and this painting is at the Newport Museum and Art Gallery.
Was there things? That teaching course.
And if we go to the next slide, that was from painted between 1970 and 1979. So this is an interior of this sort of genre that this style that she developed. It's called Staircase at Codrington Place. And again, all the figures don't seem to be interacting at all. They're just placed around the stairs and rooms that are seen in a large house. which evidently is based on a memory of her parents' house, the Objective in Bristol.
Finding out.
There are a number of couples, but we've seen 3 solitary figures as well. So we'll get then to the next slide. This is a painting that's held by Cardiff Council and was displayed in City Hall, which is now closed because, like the National Museum of Cardiff, it's leaking and the roof is leaking there as well. Built by the same builders, the same way, and having the same problems at the same time.
But that is Barry. That is Barry. That looks like the...
Yes, it looks like Barry, except that there's an Italian-made hilltop town or village on it. Yes, I mean, it's very reminiscent of the Heritage Coast, definitely. So, but you've got this Italian-made hill town in the distance, but also an abandoned industrial site to the left of it, which could be a mine or a factory.
Is it Cornish timber?
Yes, it could be a Cornish timber.
Wrong country.
So,
Again, they're not interacting very much.
no, they're not. And layers of paint flecks and blobs are used to build up the structure of the plants and the rocks. And again, she uses scratch marks to create outlines as well. Yes, I mean, in the centre there's a woman points with 3 are looking at her rather than what she's indicating. And all the others are ignoring that and seem to self-absorbed, except for a woman with her hand on her knee of a man who's looking at someone else. So, I mean, it's sort of ripe for inventing your own stories, definitely. I'm now going to show you just 2 other pictures that I've been able to find of her work. So the first one is Flowers with a Girl. And this is held by the Women's Art Collection, which is in Cambridge, at the Murray Edwards College in Cambridge. I don't know if anybody which wants to visit that. And finally, the final picture is Pigs in a Glass House.
Wow,
Again,
so detailed.
yeah.
Yeah.
This was...
So
I
the
don't-
Bombs Farm,
Sorry?
I was just reading, so the Bombs in Farm,
Yes.
2008, it doesn't say how much it's selling for.
I know it didn't.
How irritating.
Yeah.
So then the final slide is her aged 80 in her studio.
Oh, yes. Well, so she can't until they nothing.
No, 2014.
Yes, so the she was out with 19.
Yes, 2009.
Grand old lady,
Yes, she was,
96.
yes, her dates were 1913 to 2009. She was 96.
Yeah, she's
And she was,
20%.
as far as I'm aware, she was painting really right up to, into her 90s.
Right, so I'm just saying,
How long did her
Her husband died in the 1990s, I think.
1980.
1980s.
Only.
So, I'd sum up by saying that her paintings have a very enigmatic feel and a sense of ephemerality. It's a moment in time captured, and if you want to go back to see whether you can understand what's going on about these pale and ephemeral characters. So they are really interesting works.
Yeah.
The works of art.
How many of her works are in the National Museum?
Just there's Summer Visitors, which is an oil painting. There's The Garden, which is watercolour, and then there's a drawing, which I think was a preparatory drawing for the garden. There's they're the three works in there.
Three works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is still,
But there's
I think the museum holds a lot more of them.
The Roger Cooksey was the curator at Newport. He collected her.
Yeah.
So that's why Newport has got a terrific collection.
Yeah.
You see this?
I've got a collection of about 12 Christmas cards painted by Felicity.
Wow.
Little sugar paper, pen ink. They're really precious, you know, really on top slow. Oh no, they're Felicity's. We used to go regularly to Port Harry when I married my husband, and we'd be invited to give Gavin and Felicity a crit. And it was charming, a very charming place to be. It's quite emotional seeing you there like that. So we'd start off with a really nice coffee. Then we'd have slices of bread and butter that they had made. They baked twice a week. They'd try and with butter. And then we'd have a glass of wine or a sherry. And then it would be, right, now you come, no such thing as a free apero, come and do some work. And so we'd have to look at Evan's work first, and then Felicity would be twitching in the corner, expecting the two plates out, and then he'd go on then Phil, show them yours. And then she'd get a chance to put hers on the easel, and it was absolutely charming. And we had dinner parties and whatever. And she did teach for one day. There's a wonderful story, I can hear her saying it now, because I was a teacher, and I said, did you teach them all this wonderful skill you've got? She said, she was terrible, she just looked set that in the classroom with newspaper, and then the bell went. She said, and the kids just went out, the children just went out. She was terrible, I lasted a day. She was charming. And the Coddington Place painting, I can remember actually seeing that painting on an easel in production when it was, you know, she hadn't put figures in, and it was fascinating. Thank you.